I never expected that evening to turn into a nightmare. The moment I opened my front door, there he was, my son-in-law, standing there with a scowl that could freeze fire. His eyes darted around nervously before locking on mine, and I immediately felt the tension in the air. "Either you give me this money, or your wife will regret it," he said, his voice low but filled with venom. The words hit me like a punch, sharp and cold. He demanded $100,000, rattling off numbers and threats like a gambler pushing chips across a table. I could feel his desperation underneath the bravado. This was no ordinary debt collector. This was a man who had walked too far down the wrong path and expected fear to bend everyone to his will. I stood there silently, my hands folded calmly in front of me. He flinched, clearly confused by my lack of reaction. His jaw tightened. "I'm serious. Don't test me. You know what I'm capable of," he spat, stepping closer. My daughter was inside, unaware of what had escalated while she sorted laundry. Her laughter drifted faintly from the kitchen, making the scene even more surreal. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I simply studied him, every twitch, every shadow in his eyes, every hint of arrogance that would soon work against him. In that silence, I held the power he thought he had. I nodded ever so slightly, as if acknowledging him, and then turned away. He frowned, certain I would rush to the bank or withdraw cash. He thought I would panic, think of my daughter's safety, and obey without question. But that's where he misjudged me. As I walked to my car, I reflected on the man he truly was: greedy, reckless, and careless. He underestimated patience and planning, thinking only of instant gratification. Little did he know, the quiet man walking away was already weaving the threads that would turn his own life into a nightmare. By the time I reached the driveway, I had a clear idea of the steps ahead. First, I had to observe him without revealing my intentions. He was dangerous, yes, but predictable. Every lie he told, every corner he cut, every debt he hid was a piece of the puzzle, and I intended to use each piece to his disadvantage, carefully, methodically, and without him ever suspecting. As I drove away, I glanced back at my house. My daughter waved from the doorway, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in her husband's mind. I felt a pang of protectiveness mixed with a simmering excitement. The stage was set. His arrogance would be his undoing, and I would make sure of it, but quietly, smartly, and with precision. The son-in-law didn't know it yet, but he had already walked into the first layer of a trap he could never see coming, and I would enjoy every carefully planned step. The next few days passed quietly on the surface, but in reality, they were far from ordinary. I didn't call him, I didn't confront him, and I certainly didn't hand over a single penny. Instead, I observed. From a distance, I watched my son-in-law's movements, noting everything: who he met, where he went, and, most importantly, the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. He tried to act as if nothing had happened, laughing too loudly at the dinner table and boasting about imagined successes. But arrogance is hard to hide, and I could see it in the way he glanced around, calculating, measuring, and worrying that someone might be watching. My daughter noticed subtle changes too. He snapped at small things, made excuses for late nights, and seemed almost jittery at times, but she chalked it up to stress. She had no idea how deep his lies went. I started to gather information quietly, without leaving a trace. I contacted a few old acquaintances, people he had wronged or owed favors to in the past, and listened. Slowly, patterns emerged. His debts weren't just financial. He had borrowed favors, manipulated friends, and lied shamelessly to anyone who trusted him. Every mistake, every lie, was a thread, and I began carefully mapping them in my mind. I also observed his weaknesses at home. He was quick to anger when challenged, greedy when presented with opportunity, and reckless when he felt cornered. These traits were perfect for what I had in mind. I didn't need to threaten him. His own flaws would do that for me. Meanwhile, I maintained the calm appearance of an ordinary father-in-law. I played the part of the quiet, elderly man who worried only for his daughter. I laughed at her jokes, helped with chores, and acted as if nothing had happened. My son-in-law, convinced of his control, continued to flaunt his confidence in front of me, unaware that every action he took was being quietly noted. One evening, I saw him at a small gathering with friends, bragging, boasting, and making promises he couldn't possibly keep. He was charming on the surface, but his slip-ups were like cracks in a dam. Each little error, each casual lie, gave me more leverage, and with every piece of information, my plan grew clearer in my mind. I didn't act yet. Patience was my ally. Back at home, my daughter confided in me about her worries, tiny concerns she didn't even realize were red flags. I listened, offering advice without revealing the storm brewing in my mind. Protecting her while preparing my move was delicate work, but I knew I had to be precise. One wrong step, and my careful plan could crumble. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed to begin the first stage of my plan. I wasn't angry or vengeful. I was calculating. His life was about to shift, but not in the way he expected. Every debt, every lie, every careless choice he had made would soon become the building blocks of a nightmare he couldn't imagine. And I waited patiently, knowing the right moment would come. The son-in-law still thought he had control, but that illusion would not last long. The calm I had maintained for weeks finally gave way to action, though not in the way anyone would have expected. I didn't storm into his life shouting threats or revealing secrets. No, the first step was subtle, almost imperceptible, a whisper in the wind that would begin unraveling the son-in-law's carefully crafted world. It started with small inconveniences, things that seemed random but were deliberately placed. I sent anonymous reminders to creditors he had long ignored, making them think he had forgotten payments. I ensured certain business opportunities he counted on slipped through his fingers, always leaving him just short of success. Slowly, a pattern formed around him, a web of unseen pressures that made him twitch nervously in his sleep. At home, my daughter noticed his growing irritability. He snapped at trivial mistakes, slammed doors over minor frustrations, and muttered under his breath about people always against him. She tried to reason with him, but the arrogance that had once protected him now isolated him. Every lie, every corner-cutting scheme began bouncing back like a boomerang he hadn't expected. I watched quietly from a distance, savoring the precision. Every misstep he made seemed orchestrated by fate, though it was my careful planning. He didn't suspect me, and that made the process all the more effective. In fact, his paranoia only increased when things went wrong, as if the universe itself had turned against him. One evening, I attended a small family dinner. The son-in-law boasted loudly about a recent investment, claiming he had everything under control. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the supportive father-in-law. Yet, as he spoke, I knew I had already planted subtle doubts in the minds of those around him. Friends, family, even his colleagues. Their trust in him would begin to waver, and he would have no idea why. By midweek, the cracks were visible. He called in frantic whispers, trying to find solutions for problems that seemed to multiply overnight. Each call revealed his desperation, each explanation more flimsy than the last. He was beginning to realize that his world was no longer entirely under his command. I did not need to speak a word. He was unraveling himself, and in my mind I marked every moment, every reaction, every glance that betrayed fear. These details would become critical when the final stage arrived. Through it all, my daughter remained oblivious to the intricacies behind his unraveling. She still saw him as her charming, flawed husband, yet the tension in his eyes, the way he avoided certain conversations, hinted at the storm she had not yet recognized. I knew then that patience had paid off. The first phase of the plan had succeeded. He was shaken, suspicious, and vulnerable but not broken. That would come later. For now, I let him fumble in his own world, unaware that I controlled the strings of this quiet, unseen trap. The nightmare had begun. And yet, he still did not know whose hands were guiding it. By now, the son-in-law's arrogance was beginning to crumble. Small failures had turned into mounting frustrations, and paranoia was settling in like a shadow he couldn't shake. I observed from the sidelines, remaining calm, watching as the carefully crafted cracks widened with each passing day. Every mistake he made, every lie he had ever told, was coming back to haunt him, but he had no idea why. It started with whispers from friends who had previously trusted him. They questioned him about missed deadlines, unexplained debts, and broken promises. At first, he tried to deflect with his usual charm, but even that faltered under the weight of mounting suspicion. Every interaction became a minefield, and he didn't even know where the explosions were coming from. At home, the tension was unbearable. He lashed out over trivial things, a misplaced cup, a burnt meal, a comment that didn't sit right with him. My daughter noticed the shift and tried to calm him, but he snapped, his temper flaring like a storm contained too long. She feared he was losing control, though she still didn't see the invisible hands guiding his unraveling. I subtly increased the pressure. Important documents went missing at crucial moments. Small opportunities vanished, and anonymous warnings arrived at just the right time. He began doubting himself, questioning whether he had truly mismanaged everything or if someone else was manipulating events behind the scenes. His confidence, once so absolute, was now cracked and faltering. Even in public, he couldn't escape the tension. Friends who had once been loyal now hesitated to trust him. His reputation began to wobble, and every attempt to regain control only made him appear more desperate. The world seemed to be turning against him, and he had no clue who or what was behind it. At the same time, I ensured that my daughter remained shielded. She continued to see her father-in-law as the steady, supportive presence she could trust. I answered her concerns with calm reassurance, while secretly weaving the final threads of the plan. Each action I took pushed her husband closer to the breaking point, all without endangering her. By the end of the week, his paranoia had transformed into full-blown fear. He double-checked everything, overanalyzed every situation, and accused friends of betrayal. But still, he did not suspect me. He thought fate or bad luck was conspiring against him. In reality, every small disaster, every humiliating setback, had been placed with care, precision, and patience. I watched him retreat into his own mind, trapped by the very flaws that had made him dangerous in the first place. Greed, arrogance, recklessness, these had become the bars of a cage, and he was locked inside. The trap was nearly complete. The final move, the moment where everything would collapse, was approaching. Soon, he would confront the consequences of every bad choice he had ever made, and the world as he knew it would be unrecognizable, and I would be ready. The day had finally arrived. Weeks of quiet observation, careful planning, and subtle manipulation were about to reach their climax. My son-in-law still strutted through life with the arrogance of a man who believed he could escape consequences. But the threads I had woven around him were tight, and there was no room left for maneuvering. It began with an ordinary morning. He received a series of messages, some from creditors, some from friends, some from business associates, all questioning him, confronting him, demanding answers. The tone was polite, almost casual, but the effect was devastating. Panic began to creep into his expressions. He tried to act calm, but his hands trembled, his voice wavered, and his usual confidence evaporated like mist. Then came the confrontation he least expected. I arrived at his house carrying a simple, unassuming envelope. He braced himself, eyes flashing with greed and fear, expecting cash or confrontation. But inside the envelope were copies of documents, proofs of every debt, every lie, every manipulation he had committed over the years. All the people he had wronged, All the opportunities he had ruined, they were accounted for, meticulously organized. You wanted control, I said softly, my voice calm but sharp. You wanted to intimidate me and my daughter. But here's the truth, your actions always come back to you. He laughed nervously, thinking I was bluffing. I handed the envelope to him, and his eyes widened as he skimmed the contents. Each page revealed another failure, another deception. There was no way out. Every lie he had spun, every corner he had cut, every person he had tried to manipulate was now undeniable. And the world, as he had imagined it, was closing in. At that moment, I saw fear, the real kind. Not the fake bravado he wore to scare others. He realized, finally, that his life had been a house of cards, and I had quietly nudged the first one out. His arrogance had blinded him. His greed had trapped him. He had walked willingly into the consequences of his own making. My daughter appeared behind me, watching as her husband crumbled. She no longer saw the charming, confident man she had married. She saw a man unmasked, vulnerable, and utterly powerless. Her relief was mixed with awe, realizing her father had protected her not with violence, but with intelligence and patience. The son-in-law tried to speak, tried to argue, tried to blame fate, but it was too late. Every path forward had been closed by his own choices, and every mistake he had made was now fully exposed. He would have to face the consequences, and there was no escaping them this time. I left him with one final warning, calm but firm. Change your ways, or the next time, it won't be documents. It will be your entire world unraveling. I won't intervene again. As I walked away, my daughter took my hand, her eyes shining with gratitude. The nightmare was over, but not through anger or violence, through strategy, patience, and understanding the very flaws that had made him dangerous. And as for him, he would never again underestimate the quiet strength of someone who watches, waits, and acts with precision. He slumped into the chair, pale, trembling, finally realizing every lie, every debt, every careless move had cornered him. I didn't shout, I didn't strike, I simply watched, calm, patient, letting his arrogance collapse under its own weight. My daughter stepped forward, relief and awe written on her face, understanding her father had protected her without lifting a finger in anger. He thought he controlled everything, but in reality, he was trapped by his own choices. And as I walked away, one truth echoed clearly. He would never, ever underestimate me or the quiet power of patience again.